All right, let's talk about the biggest deal you'll probably ever make, selling your business. Now, today we're going to use a janitorial company as our case study, but trust me, these strategies, they're a masterclass in negotiation for any small business owner out there. This is all about making sure you get the payoff you deserve for all that hard work. So, let's dive in. I mean, think about it. You've poured years of your life, your blood, sweat, and tears into building something from scratch. It's your baby, right? But when it's finally time to sell, all of that effort, all that sacrifice, it all boils down to one critical question. How do you actually win that final negotiation and get the value you know you deserve? Well, that's exactly what we're here to figure out. Okay, so here's our game plan. We've got a 5-step playbook that's going to take you from feeling uncertain to being in complete control. First, we'll prep for maximum leverage. Then, we'll figure out how to highlight your unique value. After that, we're diving into structuring the deal, mastering something called the earnout, and finally, we'll talk about how to control that final negotiation right to the very end. All right, let's jump into section 1. Prepare for maximum leverage. And look, this is so much more than just, tidying up your books. This is about strategically building your leverage as the seller. This is where you create your power in the negotiation, and it starts long before any buyer even knows you exist. So, how do you actually build that leverage? Well, it's really a 3-step process. First up, get your financials and operations impeccably organized. Seriously, clean them up. Second, you gotta find and fix any potential red flags early. And third, and this is a big one, document everything. When a buyer sees this level of organization, it sends a powerful signal. It tells them they're dealing with a professional, stable business. Let's get specific about these documents, because they're not just paper. They tell a story. You see things here like depreciation schedules. That's not just accounting homework. It proves your financial health. And here's one that a lot of sellers totally miss: standard operating procedures, or SOPs. These are absolutely critical because they show the business can run like a well-oiled machine even without you. Having all this stuff ready to go means you can answer any question instantly, and that just screams confidence. Okay, before you even think about putting that for sale sign up, you have to play a little defense. These things right here, these are potential deal killers. Unclear financials, that just creates doubt. Relying on 1 or 2 big clients, that's a huge risk for a buyer. And high employee turnover, well, that suggests instability. Fixing these issues beforehand doesn't just make your business look better, it actively jacks up its value. Okay, moving on to section 2. Now that your house is in order, it's time to tell a really compelling story. This is where we go beyond the numbers and really articulate what makes your business such a fantastic investment. And this quote, this gets right to the heart of that story. The key takeaway is this: stability sells. Look, one-off jobs are fine, but what a buyer is really looking for is predictable, recurring revenue. The kind that's locked in with long-term contracts. For a janitorial business, or really any service business, that is the absolute cornerstone of a high valuation. And this slide just lays it out, plain and simple. It's a night and day difference. You've got Company A over here. Solid, regular contracts, written procedures, and tons of buyer interest. The result? A higher price and better terms. Now look at Company B, totally dependent on one-off jobs and the owner having to do everything. The result is a lower price and the seller having to give up a lot more. It's a stark choice, right? So which company do you want to be when it's your turn to sell? Now, to make sure your story is grounded in reality, you absolutely need to know your industry's valuation benchmarks. For a janitorial business, the sale price is usually a multiple of what's called seller's discretionary earnings. So what is that? Just think of it as the total cash flow the business generates for you, the owner. Knowing this range, somewhere between 1.57 and 2.66 times that number, gives you a credible data-backed starting point for your asking price. It's your anchor. Okay, let's move to section 3 and see how this all builds. You've prepped the business, you've crafted your story. Now you're facing one of the most critical decisions of the entire process: how to actually structure the deal. And believe me, this choice has massive implications for your taxes, your risk, and how much cash you really walk away with in the end. And really, the fundamental choice boils down to this: are you selling your assets, or are you selling the company's stock? This question is so pivotal, and the right answer? Well, it depends entirely on which side of the table you're sitting on. So let's break this down from your point of view, as the seller.
9 times out of 10, buyers are going to push for an asset sale. That's what you see on the left. Why? Because it's better for them. But for you, a stock sale over on the right is usually the goal. It often means a simpler tax situation and this is huge, the buyer inherits all the company's liabilities, even the ones nobody knows about yet. Just knowing this difference is a massive piece of your negotiation strategy.
All right, on to section 4. What happens when you and the buyer are this close on the price, but you just can't quite bridge that final gap? This is where a little tool called an earnout often comes into play. Now, an earnout can be your best friend or it can be your worst enemy. It all depends on how you structure it. So, what the heck is an earnout? Well, it's basically a conditional payment. You, the seller, agree to get a part of the total sale price later on if, and that's a big if, the business hits certain performance targets after the new owner takes over. It's a way for the buyer to reduce their upfront risk while still giving you a shot at getting your full asking price. Now, you can see here, earnouts usually only make up a small slice of the pie, maybe about 5% of the total deal value. But don't let that small number fool you. They are a super common feature in these deals. A lot of the time, they are the critical piece of the puzzle that bridges that final valuation gap and gets both sides to finally sign on the dotted line. But, and this is a big but, here's the warning. An earnout can be an absolute minefield if you're not careful. Vague terms in the contract, that can lead to huge fights over whether a goal was actually met. Unclear payment terms can cause all sorts of conflict. The main takeaway here is that every single detail, the metrics, the timeline, how much control you have after the sale, it all has to be spelled out with crystal clarity in that written agreement. No ambiguity allowed. And that brings us to our final and maybe most important section, controlling the final negotiation. You've done all the hard prep work. Now it's time to maintain your leverage and protect your interests all the way through to that final handshake. And here is the guiding principle you need to remember. The person who controls the flow of information controls the negotiation. It's that simple. Your business information, your contracts, your financials, your client lists, that is your most valuable asset in this process. You don't just hand it all over on day one. You manage its release strategically to keep the upper hand. And here's exactly how you do it. First, a signed confidentiality agreement is completely non-negotiable. Then, you release information in stages. Only the most serious, most qualified buyers get to see the really sensitive stuff. All the while, you keep your documents perfectly organized and answer their questions quickly. This builds trust, but it also makes sure you never ever give away your leverage too soon. You know, your single greatest weapon in any negotiation is good old-fashioned competition. If you can create a situation where you have multiple qualified buyers who are interested, basically a little limited auction, you force them to put their best offer on the table. This is the ultimate defense against those frustrating last-minute price reductions or a buyer trying to change the terms on you. And that brings us to the final really important thought. The best deal isn't always the one with the biggest price tag, not at all. It's the one with the right structure, the right terms, and frankly, the right buyer. So as you go into this final negotiation, the most important question you need to ask yourself is this: what are my absolute non-negotiables? And am I prepared to walk away if they aren't met? Having that clarity, that willingness to walk, that is your ultimate source of power.